So this case sets up a perfect demonstration of anarchist theory and practice. The state claims to protect us from the criminals while simultaneously criminalizing the tools that protect us from the state. They demand total financial surveillance while also carving out exemptions for the politically connected. They prosecute developers for writing code while ignoring the banks that actually launder the money for the actual cartels and suit-wearing terrorists. The United States government wants to imprison a software developer for 45 years because he wrote code that helped people protect their financial privacy. And Roman Storm's trial started on July 14th, and what happened in that Manhattan courtroom will determine whether Americans can still build privacy tools without federal agents kicking down their doors. And this is the thing that they actually don't want you to understand about the case. The government is actually lying through their teeth about what Tornado Cash actually was. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, that comes at no great shock, but they're doing it because they're desperate to try to maintain their surveillance dragnet over every financial transaction that you make. Now, Storm faces 3 conspiracy charges: money laundering, sanctions violations, and operating an unlicensed money transmitting business. Now, that last charge is where the desperation really shines through. FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, explicitly stated since 2019 that you need total independent control over users' funds to be considered an actual money transmitter, right? And Tornado Cash never actually had control over anyone's money. Users deposited their own Ethereum and got a secret code and could withdraw it to a different wallet. And the developers couldn't actually touch those funds even if they wanted to. And that technical reality should absolutely destroy the case alone. But because it's the feds, it's like playing chess with your opponent when your opponent has all queens instead of pawns. Again, a kind of tired analogy if you're a subscriber, but before any of the alleged criminal activity happened, the Tornado Cash developers burned the admin keys to their smart contracts. Now, that literally made it impossible for themselves or anyone else to control or modify that actual protocol. The smart contracts became immutable code running on Ethereum. The prosecutors, of course, want everyone to believe that these developers were running some kind of criminal enterprise and, they couldn't even control it. It was so crazy. The government claims that Tornado Cash actually laundered over $1 billion, including $455 million from the North Korean Lazarus group after the Ronin Bridge hack. And they're using these kind of scary numbers to try to distract from a very inconvenient fact buried in their own Treasury Department data. When, governments desperately try to paint this tool as criminal, they can't really hide that the overwhelming majority of users were actually law-abiding citizens, just trying to protect their privacy from the constant encroachment of government. Now, Tornado Cash use cases, for example, were things like CoinCenter actually used it to accept anonymous donations without exposing donors to things like extortion or targeted attacks. Ukrainians used it to donate to their country's defense without any kind of Russian intelligence tracking them down. Vitalik Buterin himself used Tornado Cash to donate to Ukraine, for example. Regular people used it to keep their financial lives private from their employers, but even more importantly, to keep it private from stalkers and criminals and those who actually scan the blockchain looking for actual victims. And, given that prosecutors regularly prosecute those stalkers and scammers, obviously they know this. The prosecution's desperation shows in their incompetence. And they built part of their case on this damning quote about laundering 600 million. This case has a ton of holes, but that one is really kind of a big one. As they completely basically misread their own evidence. And the quote wasn't from a Tornado Cash developer. It was actually a forwarded message from a CoinDesk reporter asking for a comment in the case. Now, they've been caught red-handed manufacturing evidence, yet they're still pushing forward because this kind of whole show that they're doing is more about precedent than anything else. And the kind of great career that the prosecutor or the United States Attorney, Assistant United States Attorney can have once the case is actually over with. If publishing software, maintaining a website actually makes you liable for how strangers actually use that software, then Linus, in fact, should be arrested because people who use Linux sometimes do illegal things with it. And every Bitcoin, core developer becomes liable then as criminals for criminal use of Bitcoin, and every Ethereum developer then should face prosecution by that logic when someone deploys a scam token. Now, keep in mind that conspiracy charges are the federal prosecutor's kind of favorite weapon because they don't need to actually prove you actually committed the underlying crime, just that you actually agreed with someone somewhere to commit said crime. They've used conspiracy charges to imprison activists who never actually touched a bomb or prosecute protesters who never actually threw a rock. And now they're using it against a developer who never laundered $1. The feds love conspiracy charges because they can rope anyone, tangentially, I guess you'd say, connected to that person to make them flip on bigger targets or other people. Writing code that someone else uses for crime becomes conspiracy. Running a website where illegal things happen becomes conspiracy. The bar is so low that breathing in the same room as an alleged criminal practically makes you a co-conspirator in their eyes. And the government's legal theory gets more insane when you examine their kind of conspiracy charge in detail. They're not even alleging Storm ever communicated with the North Korean hackers. Their theory is that by writing public code and promoting its use, he entered a criminal conspiracy with people he ever met, never talked to, and couldn't stop them from using his software, even if he actually wanted to. Judge Catherine Polk-Fala asked the prosecutors a pretty good question that exposed their entire scheme here. And that was, why isn't WhatsApp prosecuted the same way? People definitely use WhatsApp to coordinate crimes. The prosecution's answer kind of showed everything. They instantly claimed that Tornado Cash was different because it was a financial institution and that it failed to register with FinCEN. In a reversal, they dropped that charge entirely after FinCEN itself contradicted them in the Samurai Wallet case. So, communication from timing really shows their kind of political desperation and all that. OFAC sanctioned Tornado Cash in August of 2022. Coin Center sued and won in March of 2025. Those sanctions were ruled illegal in July of 2025, just days before this trial. The government actually dropped their appeal completely. They know they had already lost the legal argument, but they were pushing forward with the criminal charges anyway because they need to kind of terrorize developers that are still out there into compliance. The Ninth Circuit had ruled in Bernstein versus Department of Justice that source code is actually protected speech under the First Amendment. And the Sixth Circuit affirmed this in Junger versus Daly, establishing clear precedent that writing code is as constitutionally protected as writing a book or a newspaper article. Yet, here's the government trying to imprison Storm for exercising that exact same right. The government wants to try to create a world where writing privacy software makes you responsible for every criminal who ever uses it, while banks, for example, that process billions in real cartel money get small fines and are taken care of, and there's no executives that actually end up in handcuffs. The SWIFT network processes massive amounts of illicit funds, including transactions with sanctioned Iranian banks, for example. And nobody arrests SWIFT board members in Brussels. I don't see anyone with a problem with them. Legacy financial institutions get regulatory slaps on the wrist when something does happen for actual money laundering, while a developer who wrote non-custodial privacy code faces 45 years in a federal prison with really dangerous people. The store maintained the Tornado Cash's website, and that made the protocol easier to use. Prosecutors claimed that this proves criminal intent, and again, becomes a criminal conspirator. Anyone who fixes a bug in Tor commits a felony by that same logic, and anyone who answers a question about Monero on Stack Overflow joins a money laundering conspiracy. Like, this is the level of stupidity that we're actually dealing with here. The system is so backwards that the possibility of conviction is actually, in the high 90% for all of those who actually go to trial. The government keeps insisting that Storm should have implemented KYC and, demanding he collect user information for a protocol that was designed to some degree to protect privacy, which makes no sense. They're literally prosecuting him for not building a surveillance tool, like throwing a safe manufacturer in prison for refusing to install a government backdoor for said safe. They want every financial tool to double as a surveillance device, feeding data to the same bureaucrats who use your tax dollars to build their kind of, panopticon, demanding you thank them for that actual privilege. They lie when they say the thing they fear is money laundering. And what actually terrifies them is losing the ability to surveil every transaction, to freeze assets at will, to, financially unperson anyone who challenges their authority. And I mean the word in the literal sense, not like the stupid YouTube self-censoring way. They watch Canadian truckers, for example, get their bank accounts frozen for protesting. In part, power depends on financial surveillance. Every authoritarian regime in history has wanted to control money flows because controlling money means controlling people, and controlling people is power. The Bank Secrecy Act started in 1970, claiming to stop tax cheats, and then expanded to target drug dealers and then terrorists, and now they're coming for software developers. It's absolute insanity. For all of human history, until about 50 years ago, give or take, your financial transactions were private by default. But now they want to imprison anyone who dares write code that restores that basic human right of privacy. The developer couldn't stop North Korea from using Tornado Cash any more than, Tim Berners-Lee can stop criminals from using the World Wide Web. The protocol was immutable, running on thousands of Ethereum nodes worldwide, demanding they somehow prevent bad actors from using, unstoppable code, is demanding the impossible and then imprisoning them for failing to achieve it. And if the federal government, this is absolutely normal. It makes perfect sense. That's why I don't say the system is broken. It's not broken. It works exactly the way they want it to. This trial is the government's admission that they've lost the technical battle, so to speak. They can't stop private transactions on public blockchains. They can't break the cryptography. They can't shut down protocols running on decentralized networks. So what do they have left? Well, all they have left is throwing developers in cages to terrorize others into compliance. It's the same exact tactic that slavers used to keep others from helping them run away. I mean, you make an example of one to terrorize the rest into submission. So ask yourself, if that is true, who then are the non-slaves? Like, the prosecution reveals the fraud at the heart of their financial surveillance regime. They claim that these laws protect us from criminals while exempting the biggest criminals, which is the banks that launder billions, the government that prints money to fund endless wars, the Federal Reserve that steals purchasing power through things like inflation. The real crime is building tools that let people opt out of their system. And if Storm loses this case, like every privacy tool, it becomes a potential criminal liability. VPN developers, GitHub contributors, encryption programmers, they all face that threat of federal prosecution if any criminals actually use their code. The feds will claim it's about stopping crime, but I would argue that's the least of the issue. Actions speak louder than words, and they're sick of people having, the few shreds of privacy that they currently have, and they want to extinguish them. They can't allow them to even have that. How long till in-camera houses are mandatory? Like, we already have them on all the street corners. All of this in their attempt to try to ensure that every transaction flows through surveilled channels where they can monitor, freeze, and confiscate at will. The jury in this case really isn't just deciding Storm's fate. They're kind of deciding whether Americans can build tools that preserve fundamental human rights. This is like we've been transported back to the 90s with the crypto wars all over again. They're deciding whether code remains free speech or becomes criminal conspiracy. They're deciding whether we're accepting total financial surveillance as a price of participating in some corrupt modern society that's totally surveilled. And Michael Lewin, a developer in Texas, is already suing the Department of Justice because he's afraid to even publish his privacy protocols. He knows that under the Southern District of New York's, theory of publishing code in Texas makes you liable for prosecution in Manhattan if any New Yorker actually uses it. The chilling effect has really already began. If you want to share the privacy tools you're using, drop them in the comments before they criminalize them. Nihilist, who's a good friend of mine, hosts a bunch of tools on his site that you can find. The Git TIA, if you look. This has nothing to do with hiding criminal activity. We're talking about preserving the basic human right to conduct private transactions without government surveillance. The government dropped their appeal on the sanctions because they knew they'd lose. They changed the charges mid-case because FinCEN contradicted them, and they misrepresented evidence because they're desperate. What they're doing is persecuting someone to set a precedent that code is a conspiracy and that privacy is a crime and that anyone who goes for it is committing the worst crime that could ever be basically committed. And Storm faces 45 years for writing code that worked exactly as it was designed, code that protected journalists and activists and ordinary citizens from surveillance, code that did nothing except restore a fragment of the privacy that we all had in the past and we're all entitled to. And the U.S. government doesn't like that, and they want to strip it. That's what this case is really about at the end of the day. I'd like to know what you think about all this. Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next video.